Ladies and gentlemen, a hearty welcome to all of you to the PGE office. Welcome also to the people online. We'll try to discuss the financials, but not only. The hosts of today are, as always, Mr. Henryk Baranowski, CEO and Vice President, CFO, Mr. Emil Wojtowicz. My name is Kuba Heilig. We will just discuss the slides by standards, where we presented the recent events and the financials, and then we'll give the floor over to those willing to ask the questions. Also, people online can ask questions by email. So over to the board. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A hearty welcome to everyone here in this room and in front of the electronic media. To start with, I'd like to tell you that we had a very good quarter, the best one, in fact, in a row over 5 years. We're happy that our expectations have come true regarding the expected generation growth. We were able to achieve this owing to the high availability of the modernized Bełchatów power plant, owing to which we were able to achieve the largest generation volume for the past 5 years. What's key for the group, this was achieved due to the increase in lignite generation, which grew by a quarter. We believe in maintaining the high availability of Bełchatów later through the year. However, the load of the power plant will depend on the current market situation and the demand. It's with great satisfaction that we receive the distribution results. That's a segment which is the carrier of stability, contributing to the group results. On the one hand, we have the economic growth hand in hand with our heavy work, but this is also due to our decision and the process that we've commenced of increasing the efficiency and optimization in the functioning of all our business lines. Owing to our decisions, we've achieved a significant qualitative increase and reducing the distribution losses. In the quarters, we can see the change in the trading results. However, it's neutral, but we need to mention that it has contributed to streamlining the process in the entire group, which translated into a lower consolidated revenue level. The key takeaways is, since the beginning of the year, a lot took place in the external growth of PGE. Having analyzed the EDF assets, we submitted a standalone bid. I'm sure that this will be appreciated by our shareholders. It will allow us to fully control the assets and develop them in line with PGE's strategy. Owing to this, we will have a possibility of increasing the regulated heat generation share in the group's EBITDA. We definitely want to favor this business line, considering the fact that its growth also contributes to combating the air pollution by reducing low emissions in urbanized areas. This is also an expression of PGE's social responsibility, as well as the long-term prospects of the group's growth. Considering the above, along with the commissioning of the new units in Opole, and we decided to to increase the capital in Polska Grupa in conjunction with its integration with KHW. Also, we've invested in Polymex Mostosto due to the synergies, and we sold Exitel, focusing on our key activity, core activity. We made a decision to make a clear message on our dividend policy. We wish for the PGE dividends to be taken on a long-term basis when our investments start coming into fruition. Our decision to discontinue the payouts was necessary due to the stabilization of the financial situation of the group in the light of the ambitious investment program, also considering the potential acquisition of EDF and the necessity of incurring some capex stemming from BAT. After 2018, I perceive the optimistic prospect of a payout at 40 to 50% of the adjusted net profit. But to ensure such dividend payout, we need to change. Only an intelligent change can allow us to remain a market leader. To achieve this, we are diversifying the product mix. On the one hand, the role of the hard coal will grow. On the other hand, installations for natural gas or municipal waste. At the same time, we will be favoring also heat generation, which I mentioned before. We cannot also stay behind the dynamically growing areas of modern power generation. Hence, our decision to take part in DSR initiatives, as well as electromobility, the growth of the infrastructure to charge electric cars and recycling of used batteries. We're also part of the Smart Living project in line with the Warsaw University of Technology. I'm convinced that this will allow us to grow these. The electricity will keep being generated and delivered by PGE Group. Passing on to the strategic projects, the Opole project is now at 75% of advancement. The work progress is very much advanced, as you can see in the picture. The installation of Unit 5 devices is very much advanced. In Unit 6, we're commencing the assembly of the turbo compound. So far, the capex incurred for this project has exceeded 5 billion zlotys. In the case of Turów, the advancement is at the level of 25%. The foundations have been laid for the main installations. We've started the preparations for building the cooling tower shell in line with our expectations. The cooling tower will be as high as expected towards the end of this year. We also finished the building of the unit in Gorzów. In Rzeszów, we are also carrying out an installation project with the use of municipal waste. We're continuing also the investments in terms of distribution. So it's worth mentioning that we're also carrying out a major project in Czosnów of Warsaw. The pursuit of this project will enhance the electricity distribution, and it will be a support for the local market. Now I'd like to give the floor over to Mr. Wojtowicz, who will traditionally present to you our financial results. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I pass on to the results, let me only show you two graphs illustrating what happened in the market. The first one is about the real world, and the other one about the financial world. In Q1, realistically, we accounted for the largest peak load demand for energy. In January, it was 26 gigawatts. So we can see that Poland's economy keeps growing due to the spread of the prices among Poland, Western, Southern, and Northern markets. In the first months, January, February, Poland was a net exporter. We mostly exported to Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, whereas in March, the market situation changed, wherein the temperatures were not as low and the energy prices dropped in the West. That export channel closed, and the imports to Poland remained from Sweden, from Ukraine, and through Lithuania. The next graph shows the price levels. So for the next year, we can be expecting a good growth to slight growth to 160 zlotys. The market, as some participants of it claim, expects some coal price increases, which will then translate into the electricity price increases. As regards the price that we at PGE have realized in Q1, that was 163 zlotys. Now we'll pass on to the typical financial amounts. The first two remarks about the results, fundamental results. This was the first quarter where we did not have any LTC revenues, and the first quarters where we did not have 100% energy exchange obligation. Especially the latter effect, the latter phenomenon, was visible by the fact that the revenues dropped, which you no longer have it. I'm sure you're perfectly aware of it. The revenues dropped. This does not result from the price decreases. Let me only remind you, to the experts, this results from the fact that if there was an energy exchange obligation, that meant that the energy supplied by the generators to the energy exchange and the electricity bought by the distributor and sold to the final users was the same energy, but the revenues were doubled. So right now we no longer have such a large exchange obligation. The revenues dropped, and the margin remains without any change. Considering these two phenomena, we've been observing that our EBITDA, even as reported, has grown by several percentage points, which is a good phenomenon because this is an EBITDA net of such items which we always consider to be one-off elements. So now, without those one-offs, we're also growing. And the next thing which makes us happy is that the EBITDA increase was triggered by the increase in the volumes in our operations, both in terms of generation as well as in terms of distribution. In the next slides, you will be able to see that both the electricity volumes generated have grown, as well as the electricity volumes which our distribution company has been transferring to our customers. What I would also like to mention, other than operating activity, are two transactions. One of them is an M&A transaction. That was the sale of Exetel, where we incurred and disclosed a slight loss, and this is visible in the financial costs, and the purchase of Polymex, the acquisition of Polymex. Actually, the effect from the increase of the call options, which you can see in the financial revenues. As we pass on to the slide illustrating the main EBITDA change factors of recurring EBITDA. This is the green line about the energy, and the fact that it's not accompanied by a red item in terms of the raw materials, which is hard coal. This is owing to the fact that we've had larger generation volumes based on lignite, which for us as PGE is the kind of fuel involving fixed costs. So each megawatt hour generated on lignite contributes much more to the EBITDA growth than the same megawatt hour generated on hard coal. Of course, the variable costs regarding CO2 have also stayed, so you can see this red CO2 cost. We can see this in the red. The price did not increase, so this is another red. This wholesale price of electricity of 46, so that's in the red, and you can see the increase of the EBITDA in terms of trade. This is what I mentioned as we discussed the annual results, where the situation of our lower involvement in the competition and lower focusing on the margin than on volumes is starting to be the right direction. The next slide, that's exactly the one which confirms what I was just saying. About 2 terawatt hours more were generated based on lignite, with a slightly lower generation on hard coal. And the fact that we've been generating more based on lignite stems from the fact that the modernization of the units in Bełchatów were finalized, so we believe that this is more of a recurring value than the one that we had in the prior year. The lower hard coal generation is again an effect of the overhaul, which has been commenced in Opole of one of the units, as well as a lower use of Dolna Odra. The next operating factors: availability and the capacity factor, only confirms what I mentioned, the better results achieved based on lignite due to the finalizing of the modernization, hence the higher availability, a slightly lower availability on hard coal. The decreases stem from such factors as downtimes in Rzeszów, and from market factors. We no longer generate so much based on biomass. This is no longer as profitable. And as regards investment related factors, we just launched a new unit in Gorzów. As we take a look at the wind farms, it's comparable with what we had last year, which probably doesn't make you all that happy because last year was pretty weak. This value was rather low, so the maintaining of the wind strengths at the lower levels as compared to long-term averages is something which makes us rather worry. However, we hardly have any influence upon this. As regards the distribution, the volume has grown by another 4% on a year-on-year basis. On the other hand, we were also able to decrease the network loss volumes owing to the operations of our distribution company, which has a positive impact on the EBITDA. As we look at the factors observed by the regulators, SAIDI, SAIFI, they are higher than last year. Last year we did not have such catastrophic phenomena as we had at the turn of February, unless I'm mistaken. But this year we believe we will fit the targets defined by the regulator. This will be mostly impacted by the situation in summer in July, August, where the scale of such phenomena has always had the largest influence. The CEO has already mentioned our investments, our capital expenditures. Let me only confirm that all the investments have been pursued. The drop in the capex on a year-on-year basis resulted from several items. The payment schedule in Opole looked like this, that in this quarter the payments were lower by 500 million than as compared to the first quarter of the prior year. Also last year we had the payments due to the modernization in Bełchatów, which we no longer have in this quarter. Definitely the capex levels dropped in renewables. Q1 was or the prior year was the year when we finalized the wind farms in Letnisko. This year, for obvious reasons, We're no longer investing all that extensively in wind farms. The capex only relates to the maintenance of the assets and some expenditure regarding the offshore wind farms. In terms of distribution, the level is roughly similar. In Q1, the situation is mostly dependent upon the weather, whether the work can or cannot be pursued in January and in February. And now let's take a look at the future, at our expectations. For the next 3 quarters, in conventional generation, we are maintaining our prior outlooks. We expect that the price to be realized over this year will range from 163 to 165 zlotys per megawatt hour. Let me remind you that in Q1 this was a price of 163 zlotys, and last year, unless I'm mistaken, was 167. We expect higher volumes based on lignite, which, as I mentioned before, has a very advantageous impact on the marginality and the EBITDA. This year will be a year where a final adjustment of the LTCs will take place, but I'm not capable of providing you with any amounts. This is still subject to analyses, and the decision is at the hand of the Energy Regulatory Office. In terms of renewables, we see a decline. We see what the prices are and what they looked like last year. As regards the supply, the same prices have an advantageous result of the PMs, so they impact the higher prices, the higher profits. We expect stabilization with regard to the market activities and a greater focusing on marginality than on volumes. As regards distribution, the situation is stable. The outlook is stable. We possibly expect slightly higher profits due to the higher volumes. So our distribution area will be the one to keep growing going forward. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Now you're all invited to asking questions. First, we are obviously giving the floor to the people gathered here in this room. Yes, please. Paweł Puchalski, BZWBK. You mentioned, Mr. President, stabilization, financial stabilization of the group on slide 5. Now, let me ask you, is the financial situation of PGE Group unstable? Is there any risk that the covenants might be breached in the next years, or are there any investments planned for this year or next year? Of course, I'd like to find out which reasons are behind the decision regarding the dividend. Of course, many people are envious of our stable financial situation. We're not expecting the breaching of any covenants over the next couple of years. And if we should run such a risk, we'll definitely talk to the banks, but this is purely theoretical at this point. We're in for quite some expenditure on EDF assets. We're in for some M&A assets, also regarding our generating assets, core assets. We believe that the company's financial situation and the entire group's financial situation is stable, and we wish to maintain it in such shape. Good morning, Piotr Dzięciołowski, Citibank. I have two questions. First, I'd like to ask about EDF assets. Do you think it's a good idea to rebuild the power plant in Rybnik? How much could it cost? There have been some articles that also a coal mine could be built there. Do you have such plans, especially in the light of the words of Minister Tchórzewski, who said that you'd need to build 6 more units in Poland on top of what's already being built? And the second question, when would you have to start incurring capex on this big, huge power plant, given the end of Bełchatów? So is it 22? What's the plan? Because so that if the shareholders get the first dividends in 2020, is that right? If the shareholders get the first dividend in 2020, come Rybnik, and then you say that now you have to invest in a nuclear power plant, and you start building this power plant in 22, we will never be able to see this dividend. So when would have this major capex take into place? You mean the major capex to build the major Rybnik power plant? That's my first question. No, I don't quite understand. So my first, this great big Kubin or nuclear energy was 80 billion during the IPO. That was the capex. So Szczerców coal will finish in 2030. So Poland will need to add 3 gigawatts, which costs some money. And to launch this, in my opinion, in 2022, you need to incur some capex. So if until 2020 the company is not paying any dividends, and then you have to be involved in capex programs, and we might not see any dividend in the first place. Let me answer this. In our strategy, we've been showing that both a nuclear power plant as well as Gubin Ozłoczew are options which we will decide on pursuing after 2020, once we know something more about the regulations in place. The construction of the nuclear power plant, in my opinion, is such a large enterprise, in my opinion anyway, that PGE will not be capable of handling this on its own. Our work on nuclear generation has been focused or limited to carrying out environmental impact analyses to provide the materials based on which the decision might be made on whether to build such a power plant and where to build it. Right now, our financial plans don't contain the construction of a nuclear power plant as such. And as regards Rybnik, let me take this question. As you remember from our strategy, we have several strategic options, which depending on how the market regulations change and what they look like, what the situation will be like, both with regard to EU ETS, as well as the CO2 price curve. We will be making this decision once we have a greater certainty as to our business environment. As regards EDF and Rybnik assets, as of today, once we've signed the final agreement for the acquisition of EDF, the first task in front of us, and this is not a trivial thing, will be the consolidation or integration of the EDF processes and EDF assets with our capital group. So this is the single most important task in front of us. Robert May, good morning. I'd like to ask whether the lack of the dividend could be connected to the fact that there's one more thing to be acquired, which is ZE Pack. Are you thinking about helping your colleagues in lignite? One more question about the energy price, because still in 2017 we have a quote of 163 zlotys, and the energy co has been on an increase. Do you see any possibilities that the contracts for 2013 might be on the increase, or would you rather expect that there will be a stabilization? And one more thing about renewables. We can see a decrease in the EBITDA. Does it stem from the dissolution of long-term contracts for collecting the certificates from your wind farms? Or could you update us on this? As regards ZE Pack, no analyses have been carried out by us that would bring us any closer to making any decision or considerations on a possible acquisition of such assets, especially that we're not aware of these assets being for sale. I believe that the group is in for another challenge connected with EDF, and that's what we wish to focus on. And as regards the other two questions, Mr. Wojtowicz will take them. Let me tell you, the energy price, I just provided the range within which we would expect the average price, 163 to 165 zlotys over the remaining part of the year. For obvious reasons, I will not provide you with a level at which we would expect to sell the energy in the upcoming weeks or months, days or weeks. We believe that the contracts formulated in such a way that they protect our interests in the right way, and hopefully merchant integrity will hold the upper hand over greed, and it will turn out that contracts should be observed, and that's why we've been recognizing the contract prices per contracts in our revenues. And what we're disclosing as a decrease in revenues in renewables does not have such an impact with regard to ENEA. Also, to add something to this, the ENEA volumes are largely insufficient. I mean, the volumes collected from us by ENEA, or that they should be collecting, are much lower from what they should. So this definitely impacts our outlook for this year. Michał Koziemiecki, JP Morgan's. I have a couple of questions. Let me start with the EDF transaction. The EBITDA that EDF Poland provides, which percentage comes from regulated assets, from cogeneration and heat power plants? I don't think we were capable of answering this question at this moment. We have no data in front of us that would allow us to provide you with a precise answer. But to take it differently, the driver for this transaction are precisely regulated assets. So you should expect that most of the assets are regulated assets. 2/3, I won't venture to take a guess. Please spare me this. Most probably will inform you at the moment of acquisition, at the moment when we'd be able to disclose it without infringing our non-disclosure agreements. At this moment, we're not capable of disclosing this. Let me remind you that we did not buy the assets yesterday. It's still EDF that controls them. That's another question. The next question, we didn't hear the question, sorry. The next question about the Rybnik power plant. Am I right in understanding that this would be technologically similar to Dolna Odra, and hence how much would you need to spend to make it BAT compliant? I know that each such project has a certain corporate path in its group where the economic efficiency of each such project is evaluated, and each such project, if we have it in our cooperation, it has to pass the investment committee. The investment committee evaluates the long-term efficiency of each such project, and after the evaluation, a decision is made whether it's interesting for us or not. As of today, this is fortune-telling. But technologically speaking, this is a similar power plant to Dolna Odra. Am I right in understanding? Technologically speaking, Rybnik and Dolna Odra were built in the same period roughly, but they have slightly different conditions in terms of the grid connection and their significance for the national energy system, and the working time of the units are slightly different. So to compare it, that it's the same or not, technologically speaking, from the operating point of view, is a little bit ungrounded. Financially speaking, yes, but operating in terms of operations, in the sense that we are capable of defining the potential rate of return from such a project, which is connected with a very simple parameter, maybe not the only one, but which is the utilization time. Let's forget Rybnik for a moment. As regards the results for this 6 tera from lignite generation, should it be treated as a representative generation level for the next quarters, given the seasonality? I believe that this year, the first half of this year, is much more representative than the previous year. So it's roughly 42 at this moment. that you could achieve? We have to make allowance for seasonality. Q2 and Q3 tend to be a little bit weaker. I understand that. Okay, and in terms of distribution, do we have, was this positive effect of this difference, should it be treated as a one-off to be mitigated by the negative difference in the next quarters, or should you expect a reversal of this positive item? I believe that this is a result of tough work by this company, so this is no coincidence. It's a lasting trend that we are reducing the network losses. So the result on distribution will grow if this trend is maintained. As I said, the result on distribution is viewed as stable with a slight possibility of increasing also due to higher volumes. And as regards also trade, supply, you can see there that it was on property rights, it was 1,600 delta on a year-on-year basis. So given the price of green certificates on a year-on-year basis, can it be maintained in the next quarter? Then it will be flattened till the end of this year. Am I right in understanding this? The support from this in the segment? Probably the PMs cannot drop to zero or into negative amounts. The impact of the drop in the prices of PMs will end someday. I couldn't tell you whether it will take another year. It seems that the drop in the PM prices is close to its boundaries, so the impact of this spread between the price which was taken into account for energy prices and the price at which we buy will be rather dwindling towards the end of this year. Uskary Bosch brokerage house. I'd like to ask you about the EDF assets. How much would you have to incur in capex to generate the same EBITDA ceteris paribus? Since we decided to go for the transaction, we evaluate, we assess EDF assets as good. As regards the capex amounts, I think this is contained in the risks that we've tried to assess while preparing for this transaction. As regards the capex amounts going forward, I think it's a little bit too early to inform you about this at this moment. Let's just acquire those assets first, and then we'll be able to discuss them a little bit on a broader basis. Can I ask another question? I'd like to ask third question. Okay, third question. And the second round, third one. Assuming the optimistic finalization of the EDF M&A transaction, please tell me whether it triggers a necessity of issuing a call on cogeneration. Or would you take it off the stock exchange, because that's what I have? And what would be the schedule for this? Because I know that some work is underway. It will be important from the point of view of the results. Cogeneration. Probably everyone will be able to see how many shares EDF has, how much they're selling, and what it means from the point of view of the law. But today, since we have not a single share of cogeneration, not a single stock, we will not tell you whether we would just take it off the Warsaw Stock Exchange or not. It's way too early. But as regards the power market, the work is underway in the ministry. The legislative process is, as we all know. We hope that the work will end in a positive effects, that the first auctions will be held this year in the power market. Which year would they be? Is if the auction takes place this year, we're talking about the auctions for 2021. And when do we start trading electricity for 21? Because I think there is a market. If there is the energy market, where would you expect the wholesale price in Poland for 2021? This is a question about our expectation of the price paths, but you could provide us with a range. Well, I can give you a range from 0 to infinitum. No, it's a valid question. What do you think that whether we would have the price level as in the German market for 130? Everybody will be able to provide you with a responsible answer to your question. We need to have one basic situation which is stabilized. What the power market will look like from the legislative point of view. We've been analyzing it based on the variance, but we shall not discuss those variants in public. Thank you. So let me ask one more question. I've only asked one. So the second one, Piotr asked about your expenditure for 2020-30. And it's not the case that, you're not planning for today because you're holding 40% of the market. If you're not planning on building, that will mean that the interconnectors will be very much heated at the boundaries in 2030. So is there any way you could avoid spending 20 to 30 billion zlotys on new investments other than capex necessary to maintain the asset levels? Whether there is a possibility we could avoid spending. Well, if we can afford it, maybe we will spend the money. But today we've said that we've been analyzing very closely the regulatory and legal environment, and this will provide a basis on whether we decide on capex or investments or not. Another basis for investments, for investment-related decisions, will stem from the fact whether we will be able to realize positive cash flows from the investments or not. The third question, connected with the first two questions, or the answer to this question, is to what extent the group will be able to afford investments in 2020-2030, and in which areas. Let me remind you that we have three investment options. and work is underway. It's not that we're not planning, we are planning. Planning in the power generation is always on a long-term basis, but an investment related decision has to be based on rational economic grounds. So if I may, I heard you say that if we can afford it, we will spend. So what that means, we're not paying out any dividend until 2019, and then with a positive NPV. Well, I think this is a far-reaching simplification in the thinking process. We would like to pay out the dividend after 2018, as we've presented. One more question from me. The support for cogeneration, as I understand it, expires in 2018 with the possibility of settling the red and yellow certificates. Is there any way of any work underway to extend it? Do you expect any support after that year? And a follow-up on the power exchange, power market. I'm sure you're close to the negotiations at the ministry. Is there any way that the power exchange market could be implemented in Poland without the notification with the European Commission? As for the second question, I'd advise you to ask this question of the Ministry of Energy. I won't be talking on behalf of the owner. And as regards the first question, let me tell you that cogeneration is one of the ways of generating heat and electricity, which is supported by the European Commission. Okay, thank you very much for the questions from the room. It seems we've exhausted them. I can't see any of them. Since we have two questions, for logistical reasons, no press conference was organized. We have two questions from journalists. Let me also ask them. From Agnieszka Parteczko from Thomson. The first question is the first part is obvious. What the transaction amount might be, and the next one regarding the possibility of funding it, how PGE means to approach this. Let me only answer the second part. We have credit lines available as well as free cash flow to be able and spend the amounts provided. Thank you. And we have another question from Aneta Wierczewicz from Rzeczpospolita Daily. Also, it has also been touched upon, but not directly, about the adjustment costs for the new BAT at EDF and whether we maintain 1.8 billion of the costs in for our assets. As of today, 1.8 billion for our assets is what we confirm, and as regards EDF, we will be talking about this once we've acquired the company. Until 2022. Unfortunately, we didn't hear the question. It was asked off the mic. Unless there are any further questions or follow-ups from the room, thank you very much for coming, for your participation on the other side of the screen. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in August while presenting the results for the first semester, if not before. Thank you.